Everyone knew that Marco, the big shot in the Beijing elite circle, had a precious little girl he pampered like a princess. She was spoiled, arrogant, and willful. Even at our wedding, she showed up in a dress that looked almost identical to a wedding gown, making me, the actual bride, look like a joke. It wasn't until my family and I bankrupted Marco that little princess finally came groveling, begging me for forgiveness, but I just sneered and said, "Weren't you the one jealous of me before? Didn't you want to be Marco's bride? Then I wish you two an everlasting romance, in prison." Chapter 1. Just as I walked in wearing my wedding dress, I saw her standing on a small balcony on the second floor. She wore a white gown nearly identical to mine, tears in her eyes. She looked down at Marco, and Marco looked up at her. At that moment, I, the legitimate bride, looked like a clown. I was holding onto my father's arm and clenched my fist, but he pressed my hand down gently. The murmurs around me reached my ears. Who is that girl? Who wears something like that to someone else's wedding? No manners at all. A woman next to her tugged her arm and whispered, "That's the girl Marco has been raising like his own for 18 years. They're really close. Everyone knows what her real intentions are." But Marco's mother couldn't stand her and forced him to choose Camila as his wife. Finally, under his mother's sharp glare, Marco reluctantly looked away. The girl on the balcony was then pulled inside. They forced her to change out of her gown and wait obediently by Marco's side. I walked forward with a graceful smile, perfectly fitting Marco's mother's image of a refined lady. And right in front of that girl, I let Marco put the ring on my finger, then made our vows before the pastor. I could see her eyes turning red from holding back tears. Marco's face didn't look good either. I looked at them coldly, a trace of mockery in my eyes. Feeling sorry for her? Then let me make it even worse. Just before she broke down completely, I grabbed her hand. With a warm, cheerful smile, I said, "So you're Luna? Starting today, I'm your mom." The crowd froze, then burst into laughter. Still smiling elegantly, I looked at her kindly and added, "They say daughters are their father's lovers from a past life. You two really proved that point." That smile never left my face, and that girl looked like someone who'd just been stripped bare in public. The secret she'd buried deep inside had been completely exposed. Amid the stares of the amused crowd, she fled in shame and fury. Marco, standing to the side, was held firmly in place by me. My smile didn't waver. "Darling, for the sake of our family's partnership, I suggest you continue with me to toast the guests." Marco glared at me, as if barely suppressing his anger. But in the end, he swallowed it down and walked alongside me. Chapter 2. The wedding concluded flawlessly. It signaled a deeper alliance between our families. Afterward, Marco was too busy working with my family's overseas partners to manage the tension between his new wife and his precious girl, so I had to handle it myself. That's why, when I took a car to Marco's private villa, from afar, I saw my luggage tossed across the lawn, and that girl stood at the entrance like the lady of the house, chin high, waiting for me with disdain. I was pampered too. You know, even the maid who followed me was itching to throw a punch at her arrogance, but I gently held her back. I got out of the car and bent down to pick up the emerald necklace lying at the girl's feet. Then I straightened up, looking at her with a half smile. "Do you have any idea how much this necklace is worth?" The girl tilted her chin proudly. She sneered, "Only broke people wear that kind of stuff. I wouldn't be caught dead in it. My dressing table's full of those. Uncle Marco bought them all for me. Want me to gift you a few?" The moment she finished speaking, I gave a glance to the servant behind me. She got the message. Without hesitation, she stepped forward and slapped the girl hard across the face. The girl clutched her cheek, staring at me in disbelief. The servant scoffed. "What kind of thing are you, speaking to our miss like that?" Then, under another glance from me, the maid pinned the struggling girl down at my feet. I raised her chin with one hand, carefully examined her pampered little face, and then slapped her twice, even harder. Marco lived in a townhouse complex. The houses weren't far from one another. The crisp sound of my slaps drew the neighbors out. Seeing her humiliated expression, I chuckled softly. "I don't care who you are. I'm Camila. I settle every score. If you dare make me unhappy, don't expect mercy." I stepped on her outstretched hand. The sharp heel of my shoe pressed into her perfectly manicured knuckles. Luna, I said. I know Marco's raised you by his side for over a decade, but I'm warning you, know your place. There's only room for one lady of the house. If you've got what it takes to get Marco to marry you, fine. If not, stay in line. Put away your petty little tricks, or every time I see you act up, I'll beat you until you learn. As I finished, Luna tried to curse at me, so I gave her 2 more crisp slaps. Her mouth filled with blood, and she finally shut up. Someone watching from next door finally couldn't stand it. He rushed over and grabbed my raised hand. Camila, don't you think you're going too far? Luna's just a child. The moment I heard that, I changed the angle of my hand and slapped him across the face. As he covered his cheek in the exact same pose as Luna, I arched an eyebrow and sneered. Young master, I suggest you mind your own business. Luna's an adult. If you want to play house with her, that's your business. But I'm the real lady of this house. Disciplining an ungrateful brat is a family matter. What the hell does it have to do with you? Watching his face turn redder and redder, I hit him with the final blow. My maternal family just acquired 30% of the shares in the Goo Corporation. That makes us your company's major shareholder. If you don't want to piss me off, then get lost. Then I gave the servant a look. She understood immediately, grabbed Luna by the hair, and dragged her into the villa like she was trash. Chapter 3. Luna wasn't related to Marco by blood, but Marco truly raised her like a treasure in the palm of his hand. Even her bedroom was right next to his. According to the housemaids at Marco's place, it was because Luna often had nightmares, and staying close made it easier for Marco to soothe the little princess at night. I immediately let out a cold laugh. The staff in Marco's house all knew I wasn't someone to mess with, so they shrank back, avoiding my gaze. With a half smile, I said, "So what does that make me? The actual wife? Just a third wheel? Or am I part of their little roleplay too?" The butler instantly caught my meaning. He turned and ordered the servants to move Luna's things downstairs. I watched coldly as her belongings were carried out, piece by piece, into a room on the first floor. My expression couldn't have been colder. I didn't care what went on between Marco and Luna in the past, but if Luna dared to come near me without knowing her place, then I wouldn't hesitate to slap her again. After all, our 2 families were now locked in a major business partnership. No one dared lay a finger on me, perhaps sensing his precious girl had been wronged. Marco came home that very night. At dinner, I wore a light green cheongsam with a simple shawl on my shoulders. Graceful and dignified, exactly the image of a refined lady. I smiled as I ladled soup for Marco. Just as I set it down in front of him, Marco glanced at me, then let out a sneer and suddenly flung the entire bowl. Scalding soup splashed everywhere, with a few drops landing on the back of my hand. My skin turned red instantly. Across the table, Luna's eyes gleamed with smug delight, though her face wore a pitiful expression. Marco scoffed. Now you know what pain feels like? But when you hit Luna this morning, did you care if she hurt? Camila, have I been too nice to you? Luna stood up tearfully from the side, soft and pitiful. She tried to mediate. Uncle, it's all my fault. Please don't fight because of me. But I slowly stood up. The virtuous, submissive expression on my face vanished completely. I stared directly at Marco, then without hesitation, slapped him hard across the face. Marco, I'm throwing your words right back at you. You dare speak to me like that? Have I been too nice to you? As my voice fell, a red handprint bloomed on Marco's face. Since I hit him with the hand wearing my ring, the metal had even scratched his cheek. Luna shrieked. She rushed to Marco's side, delicately touching his face with trembling fingers. Her voice choked with tears. Uncle, are you okay? I stared coldly at the 2 of them clinging together, then gave a sharp laugh, grabbed a porcelain plate from the table, and smashed it to the ground. The plate shattered instantly, pieces flying everywhere. One shard happened to strike Luna just below the eye. Luna screamed, clutching her face. One of the maids quickly stepped in to block Marco, who was furious and looked ready to attack me. Still smiling, I bent down to pick up a sharp shard of porcelain from the floor, and walked toward Luna. Chapter 4. Marco knew exactly what I was about to do, but he couldn't break free from the tall, strong servant restraining him. Furious, he roared at me, Camila, don't you dare! I ignored him completely, giving a subtle glance to the servant by my side. She understood instantly and stepped forward. Her grip on Luna's wrist was like an iron clamp, impossible to break. In the other hand, she held a shard of porcelain. With swift and clean movements, 2 sharp strikes. Luna's pampered little face instantly bloomed with cuts. She let out a shriek, clutching her face as she stumbled backward. I stood by the table with my arms folded. Smiling, I picked up the red wine beside me and raised my glass toward Marco. In excellent spirits, watching Marco's face twist with rage, I smiled and said, "Marco, if you had any spine, you wouldn't have married me. But since you needed something from my family and took me in like a sacred deity, then I make the rules in this house." "Luna? What the hell is she? And she dares to show me attitude?" I patted down my cheepow gracefully, then stood up, composed and elegant. "Let's call this the price for your little girl running her mouth. If she dares to do it again, I wouldn't mind turning her into a blind or deaf little doll." After saying that, I gave Marco a graceful nod, then turned around and left with my servants. While Marco and I were still arguing, one of the maids had already called the family's old estate. She reported that I'd been humiliated by Luna and that Marco had sided with her to bully me. The partnership between the 2 families had only just begun. Marco's mother, worried I might go crying to my family, immediately sent a car to fetch me. So by the time I'd finished throwing my warning at Marco, the chauffeured car was already waiting at the front gate. I left with my staff, without looking back even once. That night, after the old lady did her best to comfort me, she flew into a rage and declared she would go teach Luna a lesson herself. But I played the part of the understanding wife. I said Luna was just a young girl acting on emotion, not worth holding a grudge. Marco's mother was deeply moved by my grace and tolerance. She immediately gifted me several pieces from her private jewelry collection. Chapter 5. And just like that, I stayed at the old estate for over 10 days. It wasn't until, during a business collaboration with my family, my brother casually mentioned me, with unmistakable implication in his tone, and asked Marco where I was. Only then did Marco reluctantly come to the old estate to bring me back. He and I put on a flawless performance in front of his mother, and only after that did we hold hands and get into the car together. Back at the villa, the living room had been completely redecorated by the butler to match my tastes. The European-style sofas were gone, replaced with Chinese wooden furniture. Simple, elegant, and dignified. I took off the coat I had draped over my cheepow. Smiling, I asked, "Where's the little princess?" Before Marco could speak, the butler eagerly chimed in. "Miss said she didn't want to disturb your peace, so she moved to Tao residence." I raised an eyebrow. "Moved out?" The butler saw my unreadable expression and was about to say something, but I raised a hand to stop him. "We're all one family, as long as she doesn't cause trouble. This villa can barely spare her a room, but moving out like this makes her look like the mistress Marco is keeping in the shadows." As soon as I said that, Marco's face turned dark. He frowned and warned me, "Camila, I'll say it again, Luna and I only have an adoptive relationship." I arched an eyebrow and chuckled lightly. "If you weren't always pulling shady moves, maybe I'd believe she's innocent. The problem is, Tao residence is nicknamed Mistress Central. Kinda hard not to overthink it, don't you think?" I covered my mouth and laughed mockingly. Poor Luna. Such a pure little girl. Her reputation in Beijing is going to be completely ruined. She might never get married now. When I said that, I caught the awkward, exposed look on Marco's face. If Luna was a clueless brat, then Marco and I were both seasoned foxes. We both knew exactly what the other was thinking. I couldn't even be bothered to dig into why Marco had sent Luna to Tao residence. Just thinking about it disgusted me. People around us didn't dare say anything, only out of fear of Marco's power and influence. But me? I'd already slapped his face. I sure as hell wasn't scared to insult him. In the days that followed, I wore a sarcastic smile while turning the entire villa upside down. I checked the household accounts, and even looked into the servants' backgrounds one by one. By the time Luna returned, the entire household had been whipped into shape by the official madam of the house, me. The maids all bowed their heads respectfully at my commands. Even Luna seemed to have taken Marco's advice to heart. She returned quietly, causing far less drama than before. Luna had never been particularly bright in academics. To support her, Marco spent a fortune sending her to art school. then even hired top-tier agents to help squeeze her into a top university's design program. Now in her senior year, Luna was about to graduate. To give her face time to recover from the cut I gave her, she stayed home to finish her final project. At the dinner table, she whined to Marco, saying how hard the graduation project was, how much effort it took. Marco played along perfectly, gently soothing her, even promising that once she finished the project, he'd take her to Scandinavia for a vacation. I listened to their little flirt fest. My face nearly broke from holding back my laughter. Finally, I let out a light chuckle. Luna immediately sensed it. She turned toward me with a scowl, completely forgetting the pain of her earlier slap. She glared at me. What are you laughing at? Are you mocking me for being bad at school? This is the graduation project for Jinghua Academy of Fine Arts. Can you even get in? Who are you to laugh at me? As soon as she said that, my smile deepened, but I said nothing. Marco's face flashed with embarrassment. He was just about to speak, when the maid beside me, smiling with thinly veiled sarcasm, cut in. Our miss also graduated from a prestigious university, and unlike some people, there's nothing fake about her degree. Don't project your own inferiority and judge a lady with such a petty little mind. That's just stupid. I glanced at Marco discreetly, then scoffed and looked away. Truth be told, everyone in my family graduated from a world-renowned university abroad. Without exception, it was common knowledge in Beijing's elite circles. But Luna didn't know that, which could only mean one thing: Marco was hiding it from her. Given his obsessive nature, there was only one explanation. Marco had deliberately cut off Luna's access to the outside world, so she'd cling to him like a parasite. We're all seasoned foxes. Who doesn't know what kind of twisted little games Marco plays? I know, sure, but it still makes me sick. Marco noticed the way I looked at him, like he was trash, and instantly grew uncomfortable. Chapter 6. Luna thought that provoking me would bring her punishment. She spent the whole day trembling in fear, waiting for my retaliation, only to see me change into a cocktail dress that evening. I was heading out with my servants, ready for a banquet. Before she could even sigh in relief, my casual instruction to the maid caught her attention. Tonight Oscar will be there. Make sure Helen is properly introduced to him. The moment those words left my mouth, Luna sprang up from the sofa. She grabbed my wrist, her face pale with panic. What did you just say, Oscar? I looked up slowly, meeting her flustered expression, with a faint, mocking smile. Of course, his mother is looking for a fiancé for her son, and she's taken a liking to my niece. Luna's eyes widened at that. She was just about to protest, but the maid stepped forward, blocking her firmly. Miss, your face hasn't healed yet. Going out like this would be embarrassing. For Marco's sake, you'd better stay home and focus on recovering. Without another glance at her, I ignored Luna's shouts, got into the luxury car with my staff, and left. Once, Luna still had some girlish dreams, still harbored hope for Marco. For him, she had willingly defied Marco's mother. She even rejected Marco's mother's efforts to arrange good matches for her. And she mocked Marco's mother, claiming she wasn't capable enough to keep her own son in check. She thought that by attacking Marco's mother, she could strengthen her bond with Marco. Marco's mother was so furious she nearly had a heart attack, pointing at Luna's nose and calling her ungrateful on the spot. The entire elite circle heard about this scandal. Even Marco's younger uncle abroad joined in the gossip. Marco's mother could see clearly that Luna was trouble. If she ever became the official wife, the family would be ruined sooner or later. So, while negotiating with my family, she decisively picked me to be her daughter-in-law. From then on, Luna became the laughingstock of all Beijing. No respectable family would take in a foster daughter entangled with her adoptive father. Some rich young masters even joked, "Marry Luna? Isn't that like wearing a green hat in broad daylight?" While all her girlfriends one by one found new partners, Luna, thanks to Marco's protection, barely knew any of the eligible heirs in the circle. She began to panic. She humbled herself and tried approaching Oscar. Oscar, of course, was no saint. He never turned down a pretty face. The two of them played with fire, and before long, she was pregnant. From my seat in the luxury car, I watched Luna run out the gate in a panic. Her desperate look made me feel all the more delighted. Oscar only toyed with Luna, he had no intention of marrying her. So when his mother began looking for a proper fiancée, Oscar had already forgotten all those vows of eternal love he'd whispered to Luna. He agreed without hesitation. The car soon arrived at Oscar's family estate. Greeted warmly, I stepped out with a smile. Standing at the entrance, I exchanged pleasantries with Oscar's mother. After all, I was now the eldest daughter-in-law of a powerful family. And my own family had been shining brightly in recent months, not to mention my legendary act of publicly slapping the adopted girl. Now, all the noble ladies of Beijing gave me 3 parts respect. Oscar's mother had her eyes on my niece, her tone filled with careful flattery. I was equally gracious. I agreed on the spot, only waiting for the younger generation to confirm. Watching Oscar's mother's face light up with joy, the corners of my mouth curved slightly, a hint of sarcasm glinting in my eyes. Your son is already 28 and has achieved nothing. And he's out here knocking up other women without taking responsibility. Meanwhile, my niece Helen is only 21, already running her own business in Europe, thriving like a star. And you think your family is worthy? But I kept those thoughts to myself. On my face, the warm smile remained as I clasped her hand and said, "Don't worry, madam," I said with a gentle smile. Helen's flight was delayed. She should arrive at the banquet in about half an hour. Once the 2 kids meet, they can start building a connection. After that, I casually mentioned a few things about Helen's recent performance at her company in Europe. It hit the mark. Oscar's mother looked even more pleased than before. We chatted politely for a while longer. Then, a servant approached and whispered something in my ear. My eyes sparkled with amusement. I looked up and smiled at Oscar's mother. Speak of the devil, Helen's just arrived. Right on cue, a striking figure appeared at the entrance. It was Helen, dressed in a wine-red evening gown, radiant and confident. She walked in with flair, commanding the entire room. No se preocupe, señora. Dice con una sonrisa amable. El vuelo de Helen se retrasó. Debería llegar a la recepción en unos 30 minutos. Así los dos jóvenes pueden conocerse bien y empezar a cultivar su vínculo. Luego comenté, con tono casual, un par de logros recientes de Helen en su empresa en Europa. Fue un golpe certero. El rostro de la madre de Oscar se iluminó de satisfacción. Conversamos un rato más, con cordialidad. Entonces, una criada se acercó y me susurró algo al oído. Mis ojos se llenaron de brillo divertido. Levant la vista y le sonreí la madre de Oscar. Justo a tiempo, mira quien llegó, Helen. Y tal como se la hubiera invocado. Una figura impresionante apareció en la entrada. Era Helen, vestida con un elegante vestido color vino. Llena de seguridad y carisma, haciendo su entrada como si fuera la dueña del lugar. Chapter 7. Seeing her future daughter-in-law so capable, Oscar's mother was absolutely thrilled, praising non-stop. Her only son of this generation was a spoiled, useless heir. If she could have such a competent daughter-in-law, the family's future would be secure. Helen and I exchanged a glance. Her peach blossom eyes curved into a smile as she gave me a subtle all-going-well signal. I understood immediately, then turned to Oscar's mother with a gracious smile. Madam, since Helen is here now, why not let the 2 young ones have a proper chat? Oscar's mother nodded happily. She immediately took Helen by the hand and led her inside. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw what I'd been waiting for. Another luxury car belonging to the Margot household. If I remembered correctly, it was the one that specifically chauffeured Luna. I subtly shifted my body to block Oscar's mother's view, then continued chatting with her with a smile. Helen, having battled in the business world for years, had no trouble playing Oscar like a fiddle. Within 10 minutes, the impatient man was grinning from ear to ear. So when Luna stormed into the banquet hall, what she saw was Oscar and Helen chatting intimately. Luna, sheltered by Margot all these years, had barely attended any proper social events. Most people only knew her name, few had ever seen her face. So when she barged in, people thought she was some clueless starlet without manners. Before anyone could react, Luna rushed up to Oscar, shoved Helen aside, and slapped him hard across the face, then pointed at him and shouted, "Oscar, you bastard! Didn't you say you were going to marry me? I'm carrying your child, and here you are flirting with another woman." The entire room gasped. Oscar's mother, hearing Luna's accusations, glanced at Helen, then snapped at her bodyguards. What? Are you all statues? Still standing there? Get this crazy woman out of here. 2 guards rushed over just as they grabbed Luna's arms. She flung them off. Struggling, Luna screamed, "Let's see who dares touch me." The guards froze, unsure of what to do, and looked to Oscar's mother for orders. She too was stunned and instinctively turned to me. I stepped forward, catching a clear view of Luna's face beneath her messy hair. And then the scene truly turned dramatic. I gasped in shock. "Luna, didn't I tell you to stay home and rest?" Luna's eyes were filled with hatred as she roared at me. "You told me to stay home just so your niece could marry into a rich family, right? I'm telling you, no way. I'm already pregnant with Oscar's child. His family has to take responsibility." Right after she said that, I slapped her clean across the face, then glanced back at my assistant with a signal. They understood immediately, stepped forward and gagged Luna on the spot. Smiling calmly, I apologized to the guests. "So sorry, everyone. Luna's been mentally unstable lately, always spouting nonsense. We were careless today and let her run out. Please don't take her words to heart." Then I apologized to the hostess, saying I'd be taking Luna home early. Oscar's mother's face was ashen, but she said nothing, because in the chaos just now, she had looked at her son, and no one knows a son better than his own mother. The guilty, panicked look on Oscar's face said it all. He hadn't even married yet, and she was about to become a grandmother. Worst of all the women he could have messed with, he picked one raised by a Beijing power figure. Chapter 8. On the way home with Luna. I had my trusted aide call Marco's mother in advance to explain Luna's current situation. Upon hearing the news, Marco's mother nearly fainted from rage. After catching her breath, she immediately ordered me to keep a close watch on Luna. She would be coming over right away. Back at the villa, Luna was roughly thrown to the floor by the servants. Clutching her stomach, she screamed, "Are you blind? If something happens to me or the baby, can you afford the consequences?" Before she could finish the sentence, the servant standing next to her slapped her across the face, twice. I sat calmly on the sofa in the living room, picked up a cup of tea, and took a slow sip. Then I smiled. "You don't seriously think that baby in your belly is worth anything, do you?" Luna raised her chin, about to retort, but I cut her off. "Oscar's mother just called me. She hopes you'll abort the child. The young master is still unmarried. He cannot have an illegitimate child." Luna's eyes widened in shock. She asked, "Then why won't Madam just let me marry into the family?" She scrambled forward on her knees. "I've been raised by the Marco family for over 10 years. My status is far more noble than Helen's. The Marcos hold immense power in Beijing. Marrying into our family is a blessing for hers." She wanted to say more, but the sarcastic smile on my face made her shrink back. A maid standing behind me sneered, glancing up and down at Luna with disdain. "Don't you get what Madam is saying? She means she doesn't want someone like you to be her daughter-in-law. That's it." Luna stared, eyes wide, as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. But I didn't think that was enough. Still smiling, I twisted the knife. "Helen is the same age as you. She started her own business while studying abroad and is now worth over 100 million. You, on the other hand, are entangled with your adoptive father in Beijing and can't even manage to graduate. The gap between you two is obvious to anyone. And you ask me why she won't let you marry into the family?" After I finished, I kicked Luna aside with one swift motion. Then I elegantly dusted off my clothes, though there was no dust to begin with. Smiling, I turned to Marco's mother, who had just arrived with a stormy expression. "Mother, Luna is all yours now. As your daughter-in-law, I'll head upstairs to review the account books." Marco's mother nodded, then gave Luna, who was still lying on the ground, a menacing glare. That night, I never went back downstairs. The next morning, the servants reported to me, Marco's mother had taken Luna to get an abortion. Once the baby was gone, she planned to send Luna to a mental hospital. Most likely, she'd never return to this house again. As for Marco, the old lady would speak to him personally. I nodded and asked casually, "How are preparations going on my brother's side? Everything in place?" The maid looked up and met my eyes. I smiled gently at her. She nodded and replied cautiously. Please rest assured, everything is ready. We can act at any time. Chapter 9. To avoid offending anyone publicly. Marco's mother went all in against Luna behind the scenes. Right after Luna had her abortion, she was swiftly sent to a mental hospital under the pretext of having manic episodes. By the time Marco, still on a business trip in Haicheng, got the news, Luna had already been admitted and processed. Helen had just returned to China after a long trip abroad. She and I were enjoying tea in the living room when Marco suddenly burst through the door, heading straight for me. He stopped in front of me and demanded, "Camila, where's Luna?" Holding my teacup, I looked up impatiently. Didn't I already tell you on the phone? Your mom sent her to the loony bin. The words had barely left my mouth before Marco, in a fury, slammed the teapot onto the floor. Scalding tea splashed everywhere. Helen quickly stepped in front of me, shielding me protectively as she stared Marco down. This was the old madam's doing. Don't go venting your anger on others. Miss Luna was the one fooling around with Oscar, and now you're throwing a tantrum at my aunt. Marco froze for a moment, seeing that he still hadn't processed what was going on. Helen added sharply, "Uncle-in-law, don't tell me you didn't know?" Luna got pregnant with Oscar's baby and still deluded herself into thinking she could marry into his family. That's why your mother came down on her so hard. At that, I saw a look of stunned disbelief on Marco's face. I sneered. This arrogant man seriously believed his charm was so overwhelming that Luna would be content to play the adopted daughter fantasy with him for the rest of her life? I raised my teacup and took a slow sip with a smile, and then I watched Marco stagger toward the door. The butler, seeing how lost and shaken he looked, wanted to say a word of concern, but I shot him a look, and he retreated instantly. We watched as Marco grabbed the car keys from the entry table, then kicked out the driver and got in the car himself. Helen and I exchanged a look, and shared a knowing smile. The moment Marco starts driving himself, it won't be long before his family empire collapses. Chapter 10. Just as expected, Marco drove himself straight to the mental hospital where Luna was being kept. An hour later, I received the call. Marco's car had lost its brakes at a busy intersection in the development zone and crashed head-on into a fully loaded truck. Thanks to the high-end car's safety rating, Marco barely survived, but it was only survival. By the time the ambulance arrived, he had to be dragged out of the car, covered in blood and mangled flesh. The airbag had hit his face so hard that his nose had collapsed inward. I had already sent all the servants away. Helen and I exchanged a glance. I put on the perfect mask of a worried wife, feigning concern while asking frantically about Marco's condition. Helen, meanwhile, was calmly contacting my family, telling them to move quickly, while Marco was unconscious. It was the perfect window to reroute our clients and resources. By the time I got to the hospital, Marco had already been moved to the ICU. Outside the ward, Marco's mother was clutching a young nurse and wailing, begging the doctors to save her son's life. I rushed over with urgency, held her arm, and comforted her gently. "Mom, don't worry. Marco is blessed. He'll be just fine." Seeing me, her ever-reliable daughter-in-law, finally arrive, she clung to me as if she'd found her anchor. Grabbing my wrist, she demanded, why was Marco driving himself out to the development zone? And how could such an expensive car have faulty brakes? I immediately put on a pained, hesitant expression. Then, under her pressing, I said slowly, "It was Luna." Seeing her face twist in fury, I quickly added, "Marco came home and kept asking me where Luna was." I told him the truth, and right after I said it, he got furious, grabbed the car keys, and stormed out. The luxury car outside? The driver said it was the one Luna tampered with. She wanted to stage a chance encounter with Oscar, planning to cause a crash. But the plan fell through. The car was left in the garage, and no one thought to fix it. Marco just happened to drive that one out, without showing it. I cleanly pushed all the blame onto Luna, doing my best to paint myself as the innocent bystander. Marco's mother had always despised Luna. As expected, her face instantly twisted in disgust. Sure enough, the very next second, she snapped and barked at her assistant. "Get the car ready. I'm going to that damn mental hospital to personally deal with that troublemaker." She stormed off without hesitation, Before leaving, she reminded me, keep an eye on Marco. If anything happens to him, call her immediately. I nodded and watched her leave. What she didn't know was, this hospital, though outwardly a prestigious private institution, had actually been bought by my family 5 years ago. The upper management had all been replaced. Now, the entire hospital was under our control. Chapter 11. The old madam stayed at the psychiatric hospital the entire day. By the time Marco was transferred out of the ICU, she still hadn't returned. I stepped forward to ask the doctor about Marco's condition, only to be told that he was now in a vegetative state, with almost no hope of waking up. I nodded calmly and passed the news to Marco's mother. She fainted on the spot. Outside, Marco's secretary was pacing anxiously upon hearing that his boss had become a vegetable. He looked devastated, but the boss still had business negotiations pending, and the board is already in chaos. Helen, who had rushed over, exchanged a glance with me. Then she stepped forward and said to the assistant, "Everything's in a mess right now. The only one who's still thinking straight is Madam. Besides, when the two families merged, Madam received 5% of the company's shares approved by the board. Right now, Madam should be the one taking charge." The assistant hesitated. I smiled at him and said, "Marco's a vegetable now. There's no difference between him being alive or dead. His mother's in the middle of a heart attack and undergoing emergency treatment. So what exactly are you hesitating for?" As I finished speaking, the assistant saw the smile on my face that didn't reach my eyes, and shivered. He immediately nodded and bowed, offering to lead the way. Thanks to the merger between our families, my family had subtly infiltrated Marco's company. Most of the executives had entanglements with my own company. Even a large portion of the shares had been quietly acquired by us through other shell companies, which made my entry into the firm practically effortless. When I arrived at Marco's office, 3 of the company's vice presidents were already waiting outside with reports in hand. When they saw me enter, they exchanged a knowing glance and greeted me. "Good afternoon, boss." I nodded and took the documents they had prepared for Marco, then walked into his office. While Marco's mother was still in surgery, I took over the group's entire operations. Those 3 vice presidents became my loyal pawns. At my signal, they helped transfer a significant amount of funds and patent technologies to our family. By the time the old lady realized what was happening, most of the company's key resources were already in my hands. When Marco's mother was finally able to get out of bed, the first thing she did was summon me to her hospital room for questioning. I walked in with my assistant. She looked me up and down like she'd never seen me before. I smiled back at her, placing the fruit basket I brought neatly beside her bed. She let out a cold chuckle. "No wonder you're the daughter of a major family, Camila. You've really exceeded my expectations." I kept smiling, but my words were sharp. "And what kind of woman did you expect to see? Wearing a cheapao, pretending to be a gentle, dutiful wife, waiting on you hand and foot like a saint?" I tilted my head, my smile dripping with malice. "Sorry to disappoint you. My family and I now hold 15% of the shares. After the next board meeting, I'll officially be the new chairwoman of your family business. I get it, Marco's a vegetable now, and you want to pass the throne to your brother's son, but you're not in a position to decide that anymore." I smiled and locked eyes with her, saw the hatred flash across her face as her schemes were exposed. She let out a scornful laugh. "And you think you're qualified?" I didn't answer. I stood up, ready to leave. Before stepping out, I turned around and gave her a mock smile. "You'd better show up at the board meeting. I've prepared a special gift just for you." And with that, I slammed the door behind me, leaving Marco's mother alone in the room, screaming in rage. Chapter 12. Marco's mother was unwilling to let me take control of the family business. Before the shareholders' meeting, she privately contacted several major shareholders, but was turned away at every door. After all, compared to an aging woman clinging to power and close to her final breath, I, a young woman with ambition and vision, was the more obvious choice. Not to mention, I was Marco's wife. Technically, I was half part of the family already. So under Marco's mother's sharp, unwilling gaze, I successfully took the position of chairwoman of the group. In my second month as the woman in charge, I called a board meeting. At the meeting, I announced the appointment of the new company CEO. Marco's mother had originally planned to appoint her own family's useless son, but I vetoed him with a single vote, sitting at the head of the table in the boss's chair. I looked at her with a faint smile. This new CEO, well, you're already quite familiar with him. I personally recruited him from my own parent company's European division. Ivy League graduate, expanding markets in his 20s. Absolutely outstanding. After I spoke, I snapped my fingers. A young man standing by the door pushed it open and walked in with a smile. He greeted Marco's mother warmly. His face, astonishingly, looked about 70% like Marco's. Her pupils contracted. In her panic, she knocked over a paper cup on the table. You, how are you here? The young man tilted his head slightly, a deep and unreadable smile on his handsome face. Auntie, you don't recognize me? Doesn't a servant greet the lady of the house when he sees her? He paused, then gave a mock look of sudden realization. Ah, perhaps you're just too used to playing house. The mistress really started thinking she was the madam. Huh? I smiled and greeted the young man. Then, in front of the entire boardroom, I publicly humiliated Marco's mother. Back then, you climbed your way up as the mistress, forcing the legitimate wife to leave the country. But I bet you never expected that even though you orchestrated that car accident to kill her, her child, who was already full term, still survived, right? The evidence of your involvement in the lady's death, and the forged version of the old chairman's will, have already been handed over to the police. They're on their way to the company right now. You've got 10 minutes left to say your goodbyes. With that, I turned and left the room. As I rode the elevator down, I saw the flashing lights of police cars pulling up in front of the building. I casually thought to myself, well, they're right on time. Chapter 13. After the dust had settled, the true heir of the family, Oliver, invited me to a cafe downstairs from the corporation building. Oliver adjusted his gold-rimmed glasses and smiled with gentlemanly grace. Thank you for bringing me home. I shrugged and replied, our mothers have been best friends for decades. It's only right. Besides, my footing in the company still isn't completely stable. Now that you're back, you can give me a hand. Oliver nodded, then casually changed the topic. That mistress was convicted on multiple charges and sentenced to decades. She'll probably die in prison. The inheritance and shares that originally belonged to me will be back in my hands soon. Camila, do we still have a chance? I looked at him, seeing the hesitation in his expression. Then I nodded slightly and took a sip of my coffee. I'm not divorcing Marco. As long as that dead husband of mine stays alive, my position as chairwoman remains rock solid. Being with you would mean giving up all those sky-high shares, only to be left with the empty title of wife. Oliver, you sure have a nice imagination. A helpless look crossed Oliver's face. You know that's not what I meant. I raised a hand, cutting him off. But that's what it would be. I need you to understand something very clearly. I'll never be your future wife. I'll be your future boss.